All right, everyone. Welcome to our third session of the day. Before we get started, I do want to go through the sort of normal housekeeping items, and then I'll intro our speaker here. We've got our last session here today, and like always, we want you to participate. You can do so either through Zoom, if that's the option you chose to watch this session, which the Q&A option is right there at the bottom, or via Whova, which is on the screen to your right if you're using your desktop. But we definitely want you to participate, ask questions. They will all be addressed at the end of the presentation. That's really how we get the most out of our presenters, is by asking questions. So please do so. Don't hesitate. Don't be afraid to ask any question. But we're looking forward to this session. We have our speaker, Scott Payne from STP Solutions, with us today. Scott has worked, and he'll share a little bit more in detail, but worked with some of the biggest brands in the mortgage industry and helping them optimize their lead management processes, and really just doing some mind-blowing stuff for companies that are buying leads. So I'm really excited about this session. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Scott, and let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. And so excited to be on, and, wish that I was over there right now, but we're going to make the best of it, and we'll do this again next year in person. But thanks for having me. My name is Scott Payne. As he had mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of STP Solutions. We are a lead management consulting firm based here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. So howdy, yeehaw, here in Texas.
Hey, Scott, one quick thing. I see there's that, yep, right there. If you move that down, it's over your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yep, cool, perfect.
Awesome.
There you go.
There we go. All right, great. So we are a lead management consulting firm based here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. And I have a long history, as Mike mentioned, in the mortgage industry itself. I started my career as a mortgage loan officer, so a salesperson, back in 2004. Worked for a company called NationStar Mortgage. It's now called Mr. Cooper. It's one of the largest mortgage companies in the United States. And I was part of that growth plan that got us to kind of where they're at today. I started my career as a loan officer, a salesperson on the phones, making 100 calls per day, and really, working what we call here lending tree leads, really popular lead service and lead seller here in the U.S. And I worked my way up over 10 years. I worked my way up to VP in marketing, where I was in charge of all lead management, lead distribution, lead analytics for a call center of about 1,000 people based in Dallas and Phoenix and California, and had them all over the United States. Ultimately, I used a company called Velocify, a lead management system called Velocify, that is one of the top lead management companies in the United States for mortgage companies in particular, but also in the education space, solar space, all kinds of places where people are buying leads. So we have lots of experience there. But I implemented Velocify at NationStar. I ended up going to work for Velocify for 4 years, where I was in charge of the top 30 accounts for Velocify, which were some of the top lead buyers in the country. And worked with them as their account manager to help them optimize the way that they use the system and how they manage their leads. Fast forward to 2019, I started my company, STP Solutions. I know there's so many companies out there that need help, managing these leads that they're investing top dollar in. We have some amazing marketers and lead generators in the United States. And when it comes down to it, we found a lot of companies are dropping the ball when it gets over the fence to the salesperson. And so what I do is come in and help them with best practices and strategies. And what I'm going to review with you today are some of the things that companies, some of the strategies they're using today that makes them the most successful. And so what I'd like to start out with is to talk about kind of the landscape a little bit around what does the most successful lead buyer look like? And there's 4 metrics that we really are looking at kind of every day to track. We're looking at speed to lead. I'm going to talk about speed to lead quite a bit. Speed to lead is a crucial factor here in how we manage leads. I'll get into some stats here in just a second. We also look at the number of attempts that someone is making to a lead record. You'd be fascinated by the amount of business. I want to say the metric is around 27% of companies don't even respond to a lead at all, 0 attempts. And so we want to really make sure that we have a really cohesive strategy in how we're making contact attempts, whether it be through a phone call, through email or SMS messaging, through a text. And so we want to make sure we have a good mix of attempts, and we want to make lots of attempts. We don't want to make too many. And then we'll talk about the secret sauce here in just a second. Obviously, contact rate's a big deal. We don't want to be, calling leads where we're not going to ever reach the borrower. So we want to be focused on that contact rate metric. We'll talk about that. And last but not least, the lead conversion rate. Lead conversion rate can mean a number of different things. It could be a number of different metrics. What I'm going to be talking about here is the lead to fund rate on a mortgage application. That is a customer who applies for a loan or puts a lead in and says, I'm interested, to those who actually get the funding on a house, whether it be through a purchase to buy a new home or a refinance. But this can apply to anybody. Everybody has a lead conversion rate. The education, the universities that I've worked with have a admission conversion rate they're looking for. We have solar who's looking at number of installs. There's all kinds of different lead conversion rates. And really, we're just tracking what that is from the start to beginning on what that close rate is. And so I'm going to walk you through the worst companies. We're going to talk about the middle companies, and then I want to show you the best. So we know kind of what we're looking for here. What are the best in the US doing day in and day out? So let's talk about the worst. So speed to lead. You'd be amazed, as I mentioned, that there are many companies out there who will never respond to a lead. There are many companies who as well will take 2 to 3 days before they respond to a lead. There's a stat that says that 50% of companies will choose the first company that reaches out to them. This is a huge part of the speed to lead, why it's so important to be the first to contact. 50% of the time, they're going to go with the first person they talk to. And if it takes you 2, 3, 5 days, or you're not responding at all, you're going to have a very difficult time converting that lead record. Now, from a number of attempts perspective, 0 there from the never responding, but there's a lot of companies who will call one time. They send one email or one SMS, and that's it. They drop it off, right? And they don't have the process in place to manage those leads that are coming in. They don't have a process in place for their salespeople to be successful. We have a contact rate of around 10%. I would say that's around the worst. You're going to make contact with some of your leads, regardless of what you do. But the worst are around 10%. And the average conversion rate, I would say for the worst, is going to be anywhere from 3 to 5%. Really wasting a lot of money in and day out. Let's talk about the middle. The middle is going to have a little bit more urgency on their leads. They're going to call them maybe every 4 hours or within 4 hours time. They're going to make about 3 attempts. This usually is going to be a mixture of 1 phone call, maybe 2 emails, what we see time to time. And a lot of times the email is just an automated email and the customers can really tell. A contact rate, you're looking around 25%, and a lead conversion rate of around 15%, which isn't terrible, but it's not the best. And that's what we're here to talk about, the best. Let's talk about the best here. So the best, 10 seconds speed to lead. Now that is on average. There are companies, I know of companies here in the US who have teams of people who their only job is to try to figure out how to save milliseconds off of their speed to lead. I mean, we are to that point now that from the time someone hits submit, we are milliseconds trying to chip away milliseconds to call the customer to be the first to call, because the best lead buyers know if you're not the first, you're last. And that's a movie quote here in Texas, or here in the US from a funny movie. But if you're not first, you're last, right? And so you got to make sure you're first. And so on average, I would say the best is around 10 seconds, but we're talking seconds in most cases. The number of attempts, we're looking at a mixture of 7 to 10 attempts over a 30-day period. They don't give up too early. They don't continue, they don't let this lead kind of go away after a couple of days. There are contact attempts layered in throughout time. And we're really using a lot of data around when we should call the customer, which I'll get to that a little bit later. But 7 to 10 attempts is usually the best of the best. And that's what they're doing over a 30-day period. Contact rates, you're looking around 50%. And let's talk about the big number itself right here, 35 to 50% conversion rates. Massive difference in conversion rates when it comes to the best. And they do it because they're calling the leads quickly. They're doing it because they're not giving up too soon. They're doing it because they're making contacts in different ways. It may not be just phone calls. They might do emails and SMS messages as well. So that's what we're looking at here. We're looking for the best of the best. We want to be able to talk about the strategies today. It's going to get us down to the 10 seconds, the number of attempts from a prioritization standpoint, and how we tee opportunities up for our salespeople, and ultimately leading to that lead conversion rate where you're making the most out of every dollar you spend from a marketing standpoint. Let's talk about distribution. We're going to talk about a couple of different distribution slides here. And this metric is one that really sticks out to me. Okay, this is 2.3x, 2.3 times of a higher conversion rate for those companies who call a lead within 1 minute, the first minute. Think about that. When someone hits submit on a website, or they've raised their hand for a type of product, and they just hit submit, and they're at their computer, and now their phone rings, they're most likely to pick up the phone right then, because it's on their mind at the moment, right? And that's the idea behind this. If we can call them within 1 minute, the conversion rate will be 2.3 times higher just by calling within the first minute. Key stat, it's super important. A lot of companies I mentioned within 10 seconds is the best of the best, but again, we're talking milliseconds for some of the biggest brands here in the US. Milliseconds they're trying to shave off every day, and have teams of people dedicated to ensure they are the first person that when that phone rings, it's them calling. Let's talk about the impact of going over 1 minute. What does that do to your conversion rate? Well, the good news is that if you are a little slow, let's say you're 30 minutes, you still have 1.5 times, conversion rate increase. So 30 minutes isn't bad, but it's not the best. We're talking about the best today. What happens when we wait an hour, 2 hours, right? We're still greater than 1. But if you look down here, 12 hours in 2 to 7 days is around the same number. If you've waited 12 hours to call your lead, you might as well have waited 2 to 7 days. Chances of converting that lead are almost down to nothing. You're not the first. Customers are going to be upset because now customers expect that when they hit submit on a website for an inquiry, they expect their phone to ring. It's just an expectation nowadays. Back 5 years ago, that wasn't an expectation, but now people expect it. When you don't do it, the chance of converting, of that company deciding to go with you, goes way down. I always say to my clients, you have one chance to make the first impression. I've heard about it for years growing up, but you have one chance to make a good first impression. It starts right here in the speed to lead. You wait more than 12 hours, you might as well not even call it. You're just wasting time at that point. So how do we do it? How do we get the speed? Now there's lots of technology, and there's lots of dialers and things that will allow you to call a lead quickly. But the way that I've always challenged it is that, do you want, I could always put someone on a phone to call it quickly. But what I want next is, when the person picks up, I want my best salesperson on the phone with the customer at that moment. A lot of companies will call leads, and they'll get with a front end person to say, hey, it looks like you inquired about this type of product. Is that something you're interested in? Yes. Okay, great. Let me put you on hold for a moment and transfer you to somebody. The chance of that, there's an abandonment rate that happens where customers start to fall off. And I always say that, we have that one chance to make that first impression, as I said earlier. And if we're calling the customer and putting them on hold initially from the very get-go, we're making an impression that maybe our process isn't as buttoned up potentially down the road. So what we do, or the way that I've best done it, is through a competition. Here in the US, competition's huge. All right, we have all kinds of things. Fantasy football, we'll talk about here in a second, and how that relates to some of the sales stuff we do. But competition is a big deal in the US, especially in sales teams. And so as you can see here, we have our business salespeople here running a race. And that's essentially what we're going to do from a distribution standpoint. We're going to create a race for that lead record. So rather than just giving a lead out manually and handing it to somebody and say, hey, call this lead, you have to hope they're available and hope that they have a chance to call them right now. Maybe they're on the phone with someone already. Maybe they're not able to get to it right away. But what we want to do is create a race where the first person who says they're available is the person who wins the lead record. So in this case, we are notifying, maybe let's say you have 100 people. We're notifying 100 people that there's a new inquiry that came in. And the first person who says they're available, they win that lead. The term, as you'll hear me call it in a second, is shotgun. It's a shotgun race. And we get the term, I'm not sure if in the UK if they have this concept as well, but when I was growing up, the person who said the word shotgun, whenever you're getting in the car with your friends, the person who said shotgun was a person who got to sit in the front seat. And that's where we get the name shotgun. We want to shotgun it out to our salespeople, and we want to use strategic ways to get it to the right type of salesperson for that type of product. A great example that we use here in the United States is, if I have a veteran borrower, someone who's a veteran of the United States military, and I have a veteran loan officer or a salesperson, I want to try to get that veteran matched up with the veteran. Or maybe I have someone who is of a certain, certain state. I want to get it to someone who specializes in that state, but not just one person. I want to notify multiple people at one time. Most companies that I work with, as I start to work with them, they're pushing leads out just randomly round robin to the next person. And when I come in, we make these changes and we see the speed to lead go up. We see the conversion rates go up because we're calling leads quickly. We're making contact more, and we're able to convert that lead because we just talked about how 50% of buyers are going to use the first person they talk to. And if we're first, then we have a better chance. So here's a little slide that I like to show that talks about the different methods in which companies will use distribution programs. Now, a push is what I talked about just a second ago, where we're going to push the lead out. It's a round robin push. We're just going to the next available person. Some companies use what's called a pull, where someone clicks a button and says, I want a lead right now. Can you give me a lead? Are there any leads available? And they're pressing a button that says, give me a lead. That's a pull. And we're just waiting on people to click the pull. And by the end of the day, they get pretty tired of clicking this pull button all day long. So instead, with the shotgun, one of the ways that we do it's actually really cool. So either it can be an on-screen or a phone type of notification. Let's go with the phone notification. Essentially, what we do is we call 100 people's phones. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 10, maybe we've worked it down into a way more strategic where we're not calling 100 people, but maybe we're calling 10 people. And at the same moment, all 10 sales people's phones will ring. And the first person who picks up the phone and presses 1 wins the lead. That's the competition. That's the race. Now that's part 1. Now we got to call the customer. So what happens as soon as they press 1? We give them a quick preview of the name, and then the call goes out to the customer. And we're calling the customer now within 10 seconds because by the time the lead hit the system, we rang their phones, they picked up, they pressed 1. Now we're outbounding the call within 10 seconds. And we're getting to the right person, the right time, and we're being quick, and we're creating a race to get it to the person who is best to call that lead right now. So real quick, I don't want to go into the details of this, but I'm going to start with where we see most companies who are the worst on down to the very best. We'll talk about manual assignment here. So manual assignment back in my day, back before we really had technology, our marketing people would print out leads and they would walk around and hand them out to people throughout the day. That's how it started. And over time, we built on technology that allowed that to happen more automatically, where now we could then push leads out, which is the next one, or the push and pull. I talked about where they can push and pull. So they can pull leads or we can push leads out, but rather than walking around and handing this piece of paper out now, we can at least automate that push and pull. So there's different methods for both. I'm not saying that every single time you have to do this, create a race type of scenario. You might have inquiries that are coming in that aren't as time sensitive, and maybe therefore you don't need to do the shotgun race. So you have different methods that are best practices, but what I really recommend you don't use is any type of manual assignment. Anytime you have to think about who to give the lead to, you're wasting time on the clock to call the customer quickly. So you have to have some type of automation for that distribution piece of it. And the last but not least, this is the one I want to talk about most because, again, this is what the best do. This is for your extremely time-sensitive leads. Our Shotgun Connect type of distribution. It's really good for teams that thrive under competition. It's crazy. I've been at some companies where I mentioned the phone notification. There's also a method of what's called an on-screen notification. And the on-screen notification is a button on their screen that pops up that says, are you available? And the first person that clicks available is the one that wins the lead rather than picking up their phone. And what's funny is I walk around a call center where we have these salespeople, and they actually have a piece of tape on their monitor where they know that green available button is. So whenever they are on something else, they can quickly find a piece of tape and go click on that button. That's how competitive this type of lead distribution is. They want to be first. It's very competitive, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that they can still work on their job and be the first person to call that lead record. So let's move on to the next part. So I really talked about how we distribute leads. Now, as the lead's been distributed, we have to have a really good job of follow-up. As you mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, where we showed that the companies who did the worst had 0 to 1 attempts. Well, the reason why they have 0 to 1 attempts is that let's say they make 1 attempt, they make that call quickly, let's say through a quick call, but then they don't follow up with the lead in any strategic way. Maybe they're not following up at all in this case, or maybe they only make a couple of attempts, but they're following up in a really unstrategic way. And so this is the common salesperson, right? What you're seeing here, right? They're doing multiple things at one time. And a lot of times you'll hear me talk a little bit here about multitasking. That's usually when I've interviewed people, that's always tell me, I always ask them, what is some of the top traits you have? And they always say, I'm a great multitasker. And I used to think that's a great thing. Great. They can do multiple things at once. But ultimately what it means is they can mess up many things at once as well. And so if you look here at our salesperson, they're doing multiple things at one time. And what that's going to do is cause errors. It's going to cause inconsistencies. It's going to cause a bad customer experience. And so what we want to be able to do is give them a very structured way in which they should follow up with their leads, a prioritization of how they should follow up. So that's one of the biggest things that my company does is we help companies identify what is the right prioritization for your leads that you buy. Because you might have a lead that's brand new. That seems pretty important. And that is pretty important because we're going to call it right away. But what is the right way to follow up with the customer over time? What is the strategy in which you should call them? Is it an hour later after the first call? Is it 4 hours later after the first call? And how does that task prioritize against everything else the salesperson has to do in their day? So a company that I work a lot with, Velocify, and actually worked for a couple of years, did a study called The Power of Prioritization. And what they did was they looked at all of the companies who used their software, and they looked at the companies who used prioritization versus the companies who didn't use prioritization. And they looked at the companies who actually used it most of the time versus some of the time, and then never used it. And what they found was the companies who used it 85% of the time or more had triple the conversion rate of the companies who didn't. 3 times the conversion rate simply by giving your salespeople a very detailed and structured way to follow up with their leads. So here's some of the stats from the study, which it's just mind blowing. And when I go into these companies, we just run some simple math numbers. And so one of the math numbers we run is the contact attempts per salesperson. If you enroll this prioritization strategy, your salespeople will be able to make 49% more contact attempts in their day per person. So if you do the math on that, I always start with a mortgage company who is making, let's say the loan officer or salesperson is making 50 calls per day. And if they can make 50% more calls per day, they're now making 75 calls per day. And if we do the math on that and the number of applications that now, or the contacts they make to the applications they make, and at the end of the day, it means that they can close 15 to 20 loans per month only by following this structure here of the prioritization, where they're focused on the right lead at the right time. So 15% higher contact rates. They're focused on, again, the right lead at the right time. 37% more actions per salesperson and 88% more talk time because they're making more contacts. They're having detailed conversations and ultimately having better success on converting that lead record. One of the strategies that we use a lot that is an interesting kind of tidbit that I found over the years is that you actually have, when a lead comes in, you're getting some really valuable information that a lot of people forget. And that is the time of day that the customer inquired. Don't forget that stat. Because what happens is a customer who goes online and says that they're interested in something, that time of day is usually the best time to contact that person, especially as the lead ages. The idea is that we want to call them around the same time of the day. If they're available around noon, because that's their lunch break, or maybe they go into work late, we know that that lead came in around noon, and our prioritization structures can help structure that for the salesperson automatically to know this lead came in around noon, only show it for the salesperson to call in their prioritization view around noon. So that's one of the tidbits that a lot of people forget about, is that as the lead ages, the best time to call them is around the same time of the day that the lead originally came into the system. So let's talk about some of the other stats here around multitasking. So here's the stats from the white paper that Velocify did around prioritization, power of prioritization. And one of the ones I want to point out here is that 40% of a salesperson's day can be used to switch tasks. So think about a salesperson who is calling their leads. And when they're done calling a lead, they need to figure out who to call next. And the amount of time they spend in their day thinking about what to do next and how to go to the next task in their day equates to about 40% of the day. It could be 5 seconds here, 30 seconds here, 5 minutes here, because I got to think, who do I call next and who's the next person in my list? And if they're not using a prioritized way of doing this, they can waste up to 40% of their day. Now, you guys probably know in the UK, the US has lots of problems. The last thing we can do, the last thing that we can afford to do is to waste time because you'll see $650 billion is lost annually due to interruptions. Okay. And interruptions would be those things where we're wasting our time thinking about what to do next. And you do the math, 31 work weeks per year. I mean, it's just crazy how much time is wasted spent thinking about what to do next. And there's a great book that I want to recommend called The Myth of Multitasking. It's a book by Dave Crenshaw, How Doing It All Gets Nothing Done. And what he really spends time talking about is switch tasking. It's where you're juggling two tasks, where refocusing your attention back and forth between them. And ultimately what you do is you lose time and progress in that switch. So when salespeople are forced to switch between different things, they are wasting time in the middle. And we want to be able to eliminate that using prioritization or a prioritized list of sales activities for them to call. Crucial thing for companies across the way. Now, I have a good friend of mine, another podcaster, which I'll talk about the podcast here in a second. His name is Phil Treadwell. He talks about being consistent and persistent effort over time is really the key to winning the prioritization game. So it's just a consistent and persistent effort over time. So some of the other key stats of this is that ultimately, if you're able to drive that prioritization, you're going to see more revenue, you're going to have higher conversion rates, and you'll be able to work more leads per person. And if you're able to work more leads per person, you can go out and buy more leads. You can invest in more leads because you know they are getting worked the way that they should. And as I talked about earlier, those companies using the prioritization structure have triple the conversion rate of the companies who don't use a prioritization structure at all. Let's talk about sales and marketing here. This one's really close to me, right? I'm going to show a funny slide here. This is the marketing and salesperson, marketing team member and the salesperson walking down the aisle. I really strongly believe that sales and marketing has to be married. Think of it like a marriage. Marriages aren't always easy. You don't always get along with your partner, right? But you got to work together, find a common bond to make it to the end. And that's what sales and marketing really need to do, okay? When I was at NationStar, we actually started a team called the sales and marketing team. I was the liaison between sales and marketing. I was the quarterback. I was the, that's a US football term, I don't know, midfielder, maybe in the UK. I was the person who was in charge of all lead distribution analytics. And I was the middleman between sales and marketing. I was that mediator and arbitrator and the person who sat in the middle and had an unbiased view of all parties. A lot of times a marketing person gets frustrated with salespeople because they're not working the leads in the right way. Salespeople get frustrated with marketing because the lead quality isn't great. And what I recommend to companies is you always have someone who sits in the middle and plays that middleman between the two. So what I did at NationStar was we started a team where I was in charge of sales marketing. We were in charge of all these things. And I played, being a former salesperson myself, I got to play the kind of the middleman to help the marketing people get through to salespeople how they should convert the lead. So I was in charge of lead distribution. But I also was a sales guy and wanted to help marketing convert leads better. So I was in charge of lead analytics to then provide that back to marketing to help say, hey, we're seeing that these leads aren't converting as well as these leads. And so ultimately this marriage really helped take us to the next level because we were able to provide both service to the sales and marketing team. We were able to sit in a meeting in between both parties and make sure that they were getting along, make sure they had a good marriage. I was like a marriage counselor in some cases where I was making sure that the company or that the two parties were getting along and finding success together. And if you don't have someone that sits in the middle, you're going to be left out. And I have this little stat here. This is our little image here. This is our sales leadership guy who got these two married together, and he's happy in the back, right? So think of it that way. Think about having someone who is in charge of both. The other key thing that I like to mention here as well, from a process standpoint, is that this person or people who are on the sales marketing team, that they invest time sitting with salespeople, sitting with them on the phone, sitting with them at their desk, watching their process, understanding what they're doing day in and day out, understanding the things that they're struggling with and the things that are slowing them down. Have a good feel for what that is. The same token, I would also recommend you spend time with the marketer. Understand their process, the challenges they're up against, so that you understand all of those things as you're kind of sitting in between to know that this person's up against this person's up against this. How do we find a happy marriage in the middle? Now, the other key piece here from the top lead buyers is having the ability to remain nimble. I can't stress this one enough. Having a system that allows you to remain nimble and agile. There's a lot of companies who get in situations where they buy these lead management platforms that take time, and they take IT people and technical people to change the most minor things, and that slows them down. You have to have a system that allows you to make very quick, nimble moves. So a great example I always use is that here in the mortgage world, rates go up and down every day. And sometimes a certain product will have a really low rate decrease, and companies need to take advantage of it right away. They don't have time to go and try to wait for IT to build something for 3 weeks, and then they are able to build it. 3 weeks is way too late. You need a system that allows you to make changes on the fly. And so the company that I work a lot with, Velocify, allows an administrator to make really quick changes. An example would be one of my sales VPs came to me years ago and said, rates went down on this. I got to get a list out to our salespeople this morning. Just print out a list. Let's give them give them a list of leads to call. And I'm like, we're good. Press some buttons. Hey, John, all of these leads are now reprioritized in their sales pipeline. Have them go call these leads right now. And within 10 minutes, I was able to change the prioritization for that day to focus on the right leads that had the most opportunity that day. The other key piece of this is integrations. Make sure you have software that allows you to integrate with other key pieces of your technology stack. If you're running these systems in different silos, you really run into challenges in how to optimize. One of my most successful customers, we won an award together this past year, an innovation award. We have taken the best of both worlds with two pieces of technology. I talk a lot about prioritization, you've heard me say. From a lead management standpoint, and how we follow up with leads is great, but there becomes a point when a lead becomes a loan, and it is now a customer who has taken an application, they're ready to move potentially forward. I have to follow up with that customer in a certain way. What we're able to do with an integration is feed data back from that system, the loan origination system, that there was a loan now ready, and we're feeding data back through the integration to the lead management system, where we're able to utilize prioritization. So prioritization for this company is no longer just leads, it's now leads and loans as a certain part of the process. And we're able to intertwine the two, so they're optimized not only on that getting the customer on the phone, but also the customers who just need to be pushed over the fence to actually convert into the loan. So you got to have systems that allow you to have integrations, use APIs to integrate back and forth, and provide data and pass data back and forth so you can utilize the best of both worlds. Now, I talked a lot about competition. Competition in the US is huge. This is a slide from a company called Ambition, and they have a couple of companies they already work with in the UK. They work with a lot of professional sports teams actually to help their sales teams for professional sports teams. They're already competitive as it is, and these sales teams are competitive as well. And this software allows you to take sales data and put it into a competition, if you will. And what you see here is a fantasy football matchup. And the fantasy football matchup, the teams you see are sales teams. And there's certain stats given for how they convert their leads. Those stats are then used in a competition here where you're running against teams in real time. You're able to always log in and see where you stand, who the top performers are. You're able to set goals for the team, set goals for the salesperson. Whenever someone becomes the new leader, this whole screen goes to black. There's fireworks that happen, and it announces the new leader for the day. This type of competition software can also be used for coaching. There's the ability to coach your salespeople and be able to track what you've coached them and how successful that's been over time. But anyways, I really like this. Salespeople just naturally are competitive. And a lot of companies I work with are taking data out and putting it into Excel and sending out a screenshot through email, and it's not real time. When you have this type of software integrated with your sales information, can really take it to the next level and create that competitive edge within your sales teams, always driving people to be better. Last but not least, I'm going to give you a secret trick of mine here, which is inspect what you expect. Okay, remember that. Inspect what you expect. And here's a quote that I love to give, is that people are going to do what you inspect, not what you expect. And let me give you the story. So back in 2007, 2008, my company that I worked with became overnight became one of the top mortgage lenders in the United States. We purchased and had an acquisition of another company that made us one of the top lenders in the United States. And because of that, our lead volume went up 4 times overnight. I had 4 times the amount of leads that I had my system set up for previously that I had to manage day in and day out. And I was losing sleep every single night, wondering, are my salespeople doing what they should do given the influx of leads we have? Is the process we had set up before, is it able to scale and handle 4 times the volume? Was literally losing sleep every night, thinking about what I was missing, what I was forgetting. And so I had an idea one day where I wanted to see what the borrower experienced when they came to our website or when they came in to say that they were interested in a loan. So what I did was I went in and put my cell phone number in as a lead record and put in my personal email address as a lead record. And I tracked every phone call, every email, and every text message that I got. And I was tracking, I was reading the verbiage in the email and making sure that everything said what it was supposed to. There was no typos. The format came across correctly. I was making sure that the voicemails that my loan officers were leaving were good and made me wanted to call back. I wanted to make sure that they were placing all of the phone calls over that 10-day period that we were so focused on. So really, really wanted to make sure this was lined up and dialed in. And what I found, it wasn't, and there was gaps. And it was because I just assumed my people were doing what I expected them to do, but it wasn't until I started to inspect that I saw it take it to the next level. So one of the things that my company does today is taking this to the next level. And what you're going to see here is what we call a customer or a lead experience screening. And if I had to give you one tip on how to make sure that you're always optimized, it would be that you need to secret shop yourself. You need to put a lead in, disguised as a lead, and you need to track all of the phone calls, emails, and messages that you get and track and put them on a timeline and make sure that what you're expecting your salespeople to do actually happens. We've done close to 1,000 of these screenings now. I have an entire phone system. I have email addresses, fake names, you name it. I've done 1,000 of these secret shops, and the stats are fascinating. You would not believe how bad some people are with calling their leads. Now, there's some that are really good, as we've talked about here, but there are some that are really, really bad. And so what we want to do is track. The way that I do it is we track for 10 days where we don't answer the phone. We don't answer an email. We don't answer a text. I want to see how that customer or company reacts to a customer who doesn't respond. I want to track that for 10 days or so. On the 10th day or so, we're going to, what I do through our phone system we have set up is we're able to call into the salesperson. We're able to spoof the phone number we put on the website, or quote unquote put on the website. We spoof the number, and so it looks like the customer is actually calling in. We have a brief conversation with the salesperson. We tell them we're really interested. We have a really good deal for them. But then we act like our son is yelling in the background. And we say, oh, hang on a second. My son's yelling in the background. Oh, I forgot I have to take my son to soccer practice. Can you call me back tomorrow at 2 p.m.? And we track again. What happens? Do they follow up on time? Do they call multiple times after that? If they call me back at 2 o'clock tomorrow and I don't answer, what happens? Do I get an email, an SMS? Do I get a phone call? Do I get a series of phone calls after that? And some of the most amazing stats happen when around this point of contact, which is how companies work their contacted leads. Most of them fall flat on their face. And here's a stat for you. 50% of the customers, or sorry, 50% of the companies that we do this to, 50% of the time, we do not receive a follow-up call at 2 o'clock the next day like we've requested. Half of the time, don't even receive any call ever again. It's like I made contact and I'm just going to go focus on the new leads again. This lead's old. I'll figure it out later, and they don't come back to it. And even crazier is the 50% that we do receive a call, 85% of the time, 85% of the time, we get a call that's more than an hour late. So past 3 o'clock in this example. Amazing, loss by these companies to not have a process around how to follow up with these leads. So what we do is we track them for another 10 days, and then we come back to the company in this type of format where we give them a very detailed list on a timeline that shows them every phone call that we received, every message that we got. We listen to the voicemails. We understand, was it a good voicemail? Was it a bad voicemail? A lot of times we hear background noise and they didn't leave the right voicemail and it wasn't applicable. We're really helping the sales teams understand what their salespeople are doing. And then we come in to help make the adjustments for them in their process to give them an optimal process that looks similar to this, where we're going to, call very quickly, a couple times on the first day, the next day a call, the next day a call, et cetera, all the way down through with emails and SMS dripped along the way. So we can help you with this. If this is something you're interested in, I can walk you through how we do it. But ultimately, it's something you really can do yourself. If you have a phone number that the salesperson isn't going to know and an email address they wouldn't know, you really can put a lead into your system and understand what happens in your sales process every day. So let's connect. So here's my information. This is my website, sdp-solutions.com. The one thing I wanted to point out here is that I do have a podcast I started back in 2019. I now have about to release my 18th episode. It's not something I'm doing, every day, but once a month or so, I'm interviewing top lead management type people and talking to them about best practices, interviewing them on the ways that they have been successful with how they manage their leads, or it could be a third party who is, helping companies convert leads better. But check out the podcast. It's on all of the major podcast sites. You can connect with me on my website. There's a contact me form there. Phone number here as well. Thanks for having me today. It's great to be involved. Mike,
excellent.
See if there's any questions.
Yeah, we do. We have a couple questions. Thank you, Scott, for going through this, all this information. Two questions, and maybe similar. So I'm gonna ask them both though. One is around matching rules. You mentioned the shotgun sort of approach where it goes out to whoever is available right then and there, and they can grab it. But beyond that, what other matching or distribution rules have you seen be successful? You did mention location, geo target sort of, but are there other sort of matching rules, and is it the same for everybody, or is it different for each company?
It's always a little different. It's based on the type of salespeople they have. A lot of companies have very, brand new salespeople. And so that changes a little bit, but most companies will at least have their elite people, their middle people, and their bottom people, right? And so the way that we use that shotgun matching actually can be cascaded in a way that you start the inquiry that comes in with your elite people, and it tries them first. And if they're not available, we can then go to the next tier down and say, is there anybody available here? Yes or no, is anybody down the bottom level? So you can cascade your distribution programs in that way, so you're always optimized. Now you got to be careful a little bit with that, making sure you have some type of even distribution. But at the end of the day, if you're the marketer and you're the sales team, you want to get the lead to your best converter as best as possible. When you do that while also creating a race to do it, it's pretty impactful. There's also a lot of companies in the US, or not a lot, there's a few, and me and Mike's friend Ethan has a company called ProPair. And what ProPair does essentially is they're able to run and really look at the data to understand a profile of the customer, the way that the lead or the customer is profiled as far as their attributes that we know about them. And we also profile the loan officer. What are they good at? What are the things they're good at? And what his software is able to do is kind of merge the two together so that when the lead comes in, you're trying to route it to the best person for that specific lead based on the attributes of the lead record and the attributes of that salesperson. So there's some really cool technology that Ethan does with ProPair that people might be interested in as well.
Great. The other question was asking for a little bit more detail on prioritization strategies. What exactly is it prioritizing the next action, whether it be a call, or can you maybe just go in a little bit more detail about prioritization strategies?
Sure. Yeah. And prioritization can be a couple of things. In fact, while we're talking through this, I'm going to pull up just a quick example of what I kind of see every day type of thing. The idea is that we want to be able to give them a list of everything they need to do right now. Okay. And if there's something that is in their name, let's say it's assigned to them, but doesn't need action right now, we don't want to show it to them. And so a lot of companies or a lot of systems will show them all their leads, and they have to sort in different ways. And the ways that we do it looks something like this. I'm just going to show my screen real quick. So you'll see these big blue bars here. These are leads that need to be called by the salesperson right now. In this example, a customer just opened an email. It's another thing we're able to do is track email opens and clicks. And we know that the best chance that we have to call a uncontacted lead is maybe right after they've opened an email. So that's the top thing for them to do right now. And after that, this is some specific use cases stuff around the loan process. When we come down to like a contact attempt 2 and a contact attempt 3 as an example, these are leads I've called 2 times. I need to call them for the 3rd time. But you'll notice here that I'm using the last time that I called them as when the lead should show up. A lead that's called 2 times, but it's been 3 hours since the last call, I don't want to show it to the salesperson. They don't need to worry about that right now. They only need to worry about it when it's been 4 hours since the last call. So we're looking at the timing of their last call, when they said they last called it, and we're using that timestamp to decide when they should receive that next call. As this lead, as I take an action on this lead and say that I've called it, the lead would go away from my view. It would be hidden. The lead would go into a contact attempt 3 status and essentially snoozes until it's been 8 hours since the last call. And that's where I can start to really structure my follow-up strategy based on what the optimal strategy is for that type of lead, for our company, whatever it might be. I can really get structured and even get down to 24 hours. Let's see, this is a pretty long list. And then we can even say 6 days. There's a lot of times with leads in the US where they're getting calls from multiple people. We want to let that lead rest for 6 days, 7 days, and let it kind of sit for a second. Let the customer kind of take a deep breath from being overwhelmed from all the phone calls they got, and then call them back 6 or 7 days later. And we can do that really easily by giving them this structured way and to call it, only showing them the leads that need to be called right now and not showing them everything.
Makes sense. And this system here, they're hitting get lead, and it's or are they selecting the lead itself?
So there's lots of different strategies with this system. So I could do a priority view. So I'm essentially saying call the next lead in my priority list in this example. Or I can say get lead, which is that pull distribution I was talking about earlier, where if I don't have anything to do right now, or I want to click this get lead button, it can go out and pull a lead and give it to me. But essentially, if I click next lead in this system, it's calling my phone over here on the left here, and I'm calling this customer. And if you look at the top of my list, who's at the top of my list? Chris Air. That's who I'm calling the next lead of my list. And when I'm done making this call, I'll click next lead and we'll call the next lead of my list. I'm able to really quickly move through this list without having to think about what to do next. I've made a connection. I can even, in this system is really cool, I can leave a pre-recorded voicemail. So as I move through the leads really quickly, if I know this is my first call, I can click this button and it's leaving a voicemail in the background as I speak right now. And I can take an action of this and I can move on, mark this off the list and click next lead. And I'm calling the next lead of my list, which is William Miller. In the background, a voicemail is being left for this customer. I don't even have to do it myself. Yeah. And I can really quickly move through this prioritized list very quickly and get through and be more productive. And this is where we see those efficiency gains of the 49% more contact attempts, 88% more talk time. We're focused on the right customers at the right time.
Got it. It's amazing. This is great. That sort of wraps up the questions that we have on our side. But for those that maybe are watching this as a recording, your information is there. Probably the best way for the UK folks to get a hold of you is through your website, and then go from there. But I really appreciate you sharing all this information. It's really powerful stuff. And thanks again for being a part of the conference.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Mike. Always appreciate it. Yep.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.